Marcus Hayes stood in the center of courtroom 302, the industrial mop still gripped in his calloused hands. The morning light cut through the tall windows of the Manhattan Federal Courthouse, casting long shadows across marble floors he had polished every day for 12 years. His Navy maintenance uniform carried the faint smell of lemon cleaner and floor wax, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. At 45, his brown hair had gone silver at the temples, and the deep lines around his eyes told stories he no longer shared with anyone. The room fell silent. Every lawyer, every reporter, every spectator turned to stare at this man who had just spoken words that made no sense. His voice came out stronger the second time, cutting through the shocked whispers. "I will defend her." At the defense table, Catherine Brennan lifted her head. The billionaire's blue eyes, contacts, Marcus had noticed during his morning cleaning, covering her natural gray, locked onto his face with an expression somewhere between disbelief and desperation. Her Armani suit was perfectly tailored, but her shoulders hunched forward in a way that spoke of 3 sleepless nights. The 6 empty chairs beside her told a story of lawyers who had vanished like smoke. None of them knew this moment would mark the beginning of the unraveling. None of them understood that the janitor holding a mop had once been the lawyer who never lost. 4 hours earlier, darkness still wrapped around Queens like a blanket. Marcus's alarm went off at 4 in the morning, the same as it had for 4,380 days. He reached over and silenced it before the second beep, a habit formed from years of not wanting to wake neighbors through paper-thin walls. The studio apartment measured 400 square feet, give or take. A single bed with sheets he washed every Sunday at the laundromat 3 blocks down. A kitchenette with 2 burners, one of which no longer worked. A small table with 1 chair. The bathroom door didn't close all the way, but the rent was $850 a month, and that was as good as it got in this neighborhood. He sat up and looked at the photograph on the wall. Sarah smiling in her wedding dress, 17 years ago when the world had felt full of promise. Next to it, a second frame held Sophie at age 5, her mother's arms wrapped around her, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's edge. Marcus kept the lights off as he moved through his morning routine. The winter electric bill had hit $190 last month, and every penny mattered. Black coffee, instant, from a $4 jar that lasted 2 weeks. Toast from day-old bread, 99 cents a loaf from the discount rack. No butter, no jam. Protein came from the peanut butter he kept in the cabinet, spreading it thin to make the jar last. He stood by the window, looking out at the street below where the first delivery trucks were beginning their routes. His reflection stared back, older than he felt inside, more tired than he wanted to admit. The wedding ring on his left hand caught the faint glow from a streetlight. 13 years since cancer had taken Sarah, and he still couldn't bring himself to remove it. "Morning, love," he whispered to the photograph. "Big day today. High-profile case. The kind I used to handle." The apartment offered no response. It never did. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "Dad, you up? Want to grab breakfast before you head to work?" He typed back, "Oh, already ate. You should sleep. Love you." Her reply came fast. "You mean you had toast and instant coffee? That's not breakfast. And I can't sleep knowing you're living like this." Marcus didn't respond. They'd had this argument too many times. Sophie wanted him to dream again, to believe he could be more than a janitor. But dreams were expensive, and he'd learned the price 12 years ago when the New York Bar Association had stripped away his license, his career, his future. 4 years of appeals to clear his name. 4 years of watching Sarah grow weaker while he fought to prove he hadn't fabricated evidence in a whistleblower case against Titan Energy Industries. 4 years of Sophie growing up with a father who was present but hollow, there but not there. The license had been reinstated eventually. The stain on his reputation never washed clean. He pulled on his uniform and checked his wallet. $73 until Friday's paycheck. Enough for subway fare, lunch from the courthouse basement cafeteria, and the $20 he'd try to slip into an envelope for Sophie, even though she always sent it back. The subway ride to Manhattan took 40 minutes. Marcus stood near the door, swaying with the motion of the train, watching other passengers. A young lawyer, maybe 27, scrolled through case files on a tablet. Expensive suit, leather briefcase. the confidence of someone who had never failed at anything important. The kid didn't look up once during the entire ride, too absorbed in his own importance to notice the janitor standing 3 feet away. Marcus remembered being that age. Corner office at Whitfield and Associates. View of Central Park. Rising star reputation. He thought the law was about truth and justice, about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Then he'd learned what happened when you went after companies with unlimited budgets and no conscience. The courthouse appeared as the train pulled into the station. Marcus climbed the steps to street level and walked the final 3 blocks, arriving at 5:15 as the security guard unlocked the service entrance. "Morning, Hayes." "Morning, Tommy." Inside, the janitor's closet smelled of industrial cleaner and old mop water. Marcus's maintenance cart sat in the corner, the same cart he'd pushed for 12 years. But under the cleaning rags and extra trash bags, hidden in a worn leather briefcase, he kept the things that mattered. His New York bar license, renewed every year through online continuing legal education courses that cost $375 he could barely afford. A legal pad with notes from cases he'd observed. A pen his father had given him the day he'd passed the bar exam, the only inheritance from a coal miner who died of black lung at 53. The courthouse was his domain at this hour. Empty hallways, silent courtrooms, the weight of justice hanging in the air like incense. He started on the 8th floor and worked his way down, methodical, thorough, invisible. By 6:30, he'd reached the 3rd floor. Courtroom 302 beckoned. The biggest cases always landed here. Judge Patricia Holloway's courtroom. Fair but firm, 23 years on the bench. Marcus had watched her preside over hundreds of trials while he mopped the floors and emptied the trash. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was dark, silent, holy in its own way. Marcus turned on the lights and stood at the podium where lawyers made their arguments. His hand touched the smooth wood, feeling the grain beneath his palm. "May it please the court," his voice echoed in the empty space. "My name is Marcus Hayes, and I represent the defense." The words felt like coming home, like remembering how to breathe after years of holding your breath. He stopped himself. This was foolish. He was a janitor. That's all he was now, all he would ever be. Dreams were for people who hadn't already lost everything. Marcus went back to mopping. At 8 o'clock, the courthouse came alive. Lawyers strode through hallways with purpose, their expensive shoes clicking on floors Marcus had buffed to a shine. They walked past him, through him, never making eye contact. He was part of the scenery, as invisible as the walls. He was cleaning near the 3rd floor conference rooms when he overheard 2 young associates talking. Catherine Brennan, 38 years old, $14 billion, MIT quantum computing genius. The first associate sounded impressed and envious in equal measure. And possibly a thief. The second associate laughed. Nexus Tech says she stole their room temperature quantum processor design. If they're right, her whole empire is built on fraud. Her lawyers just quit, all 6 of them, filed an emergency withdrawal motion at 11:47 last night. Why? Conflict of interest, they claim. But the timing's suspicious. First day of trial and suddenly they all discover a conflict? Marcus kept mopping, but his mind was working. 6 lawyers from a top-tier firm didn't simultaneously discover a conflict of interest. Someone had paid them to leave. The question was who and why. He moved toward the lobby windows and saw the media circus forming outside. News vans, cameras, reporters jockeying for position. At 8:45, a black town car pulled up to the curb. Catherine Brennan emerged like royalty descending from a throne. Navy Armani suit that probably cost more than Marcus earned in 6 months. Christian Louboutin heels with those distinctive red soles. Hair pulled back so tight it must have hurt. Sunglasses that hid her eyes and half her face. But Marcus had been watching people lie for 25 years. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her right hand gripped her briefcase just a little too hard. This wasn't the confidence of wealth. This was the brittle armor of someone barely holding together. Security guards flanked her. Behind them, a woman in her 30s with blonde hair and nervous energy. Rachel Morrison, if Marcus remembered correctly from the papers left in conference rooms. Chief of Staff, 5 years with Brennan, loyal unto death, according to the business profiles. Except Rachel's hands were shaking. Marcus noticed things other people missed. It was the benefit of being invisible. He saw Rachel glance at her phone 3 times during the walk from car to courthouse door. He saw her shoulders tense when Brennan spoke to her. He saw fear. The reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Miss Brennan, did you steal the technology? Catherine, will you settle before trial? Is it true you're bankrupt? Brennan didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge them, didn't show any reaction at all. She walked through them like they didn't exist, her face a mask of ice. Marcus watched from the window. He'd seen that look before, on other clients in other cases. It was the look of someone who'd been alone so long, they'd forgotten how to ask for help. By 9:15, courtroom 302 was packed beyond capacity. Marcus had positioned himself at the back, mop and bucket nearby, ready to clean up any spills, but really there to observe. The press filled the gallery, 3 rows of reporters with laptops, recording devices, notepads. The public benches overflowed. This was the trial everyone wanted to see. The genius billionaire versus the upstart tech company claiming she'd stolen everything. The prosecution table looked like a war room. Diana Pierce, Assistant United States Attorney, sat at the center with 3 associates flanking her. Pierce was 41, red hair pulled into a professional bun, green eyes sharp as broken glass. She wore a wine-colored power suit and the expression of someone who'd already counted her victory before the first witness took the stand. The defense table held only Catherine Brennan. 6 empty chairs beside her told the story. No lawyers, no associates, no support team. Just a woman worth $14 billion, sitting alone in a federal courtroom. Judge Holloway entered. Everyone rose. The judge was 58, silver hair, a face that had seen every trick in the book and most of the tricks that weren't in any book. She took her seat and surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on the empty chairs at the defense table. Be seated, her voice cut through the murmurs. Miss Brennan, approach the bench. Catherine Brennan stood. Marcus watched her walk to the judge's bench, and for the first time he saw cracks in her armor. Her hands trembled slightly. Her footsteps weren't quite as steady as they should have been. Judge Holloway held up a document. Miss Brennan, I have before me an emergency motion to withdraw a file by Preston, Whitmore and Associates at 11:47 p.m. last night. Your counsel of record claims an unresolvable conflict of interest. Brennan's voice was steady, but Marcus heard the effort it took. I had no knowledge of this motion until this morning, Your Honor. My attorneys assured me as recently as yesterday afternoon that everything was proceeding as planned. Did you arrange alternative representation? I attempted to, Your Honor. I made 17 calls this morning. No one is available. Diana Pierce was already on her feet. Your Honor, the defense has had 3 months to prepare for this trial. This court has granted 2 previous continuances at defense request. This is clearly another delay tactic, and the prosecution respectfully moves for default judgment. The courtroom erupted. Reporters typed frantically. Marcus's grip tightened on the mop handle. Judge Holloway banged her gavel. Order, Miss Pierce, I will not enter default judgment without considering all circumstances. However, she turned back to Brennan. Miss Brennan, this trial has been delayed twice already. The jury is sworn. Witnesses have been scheduled. I cannot indefinitely postpone these proceedings. Your Honor, I understand the court's position, but you have 10 minutes to secure representation. If you cannot do so, I will have no choice but to proceed without counsel or dismiss the case, which would allow the plaintiff to refile with prejudice. Brennan's face went pale. 10 minutes, Your Honor. 10 minutes. Use them wisely. Brennan returned to the defense table. Marcus watched her pull out her phone with shaking hands. She made calls one after another, her face growing more desperate with each conversation. Call 1. No answer. Call 2. Voicemail. Call 3. A brief conversation. Then Brennan's face crumpled. I understand. Thank you anyway. Call 4. The person on the other end hung up on her. Marcus saw her shoulders sag. 5 minutes left. Marcus's hands were sweating on the mop handle. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. 6 lawyers didn't just vanish. A woman didn't get abandoned on the courthouse steps without someone orchestrating it. This was sabotage, plain and simple. But it wasn't his problem. He was a janitor. He mopped floors. He stayed in his lane. He'd learned that lesson 12 years ago when he'd tried to be a hero and lost everything. 3 minutes left. Marcus looked at Catherine Brennan, really looked at her. He saw the way she gripped the edge of the table, the way her breath came too fast, the way she blinked rapidly, fighting tears she would never let fall. He saw Sarah, not literally, but the memory crashed over him anyway. Sarah in the hospital bed, fighting cancer, alone because he'd been too busy fighting the bar association to be there when she needed him most. Sarah telling him with her last breaths that he had to keep fighting, had to keep believing in justice, had to never give up on doing what was right. 1 minute left. Marcus set down his mop. Every step up the center aisle felt like walking through concrete. The reporters turned first, confusion on their faces, then the lawyers, then the judge. By the time Marcus reached the defense table, the entire courtroom had fallen silent. Catherine Brennan looked up at him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her face, the way her expensive makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide beneath layers of wealth and ice. Marcus turned to face Judge Holloway. His voice came out steady, stronger than he felt. "Your Honor." The judge's eyebrows rose. "Sir, this is a closed proceeding. I'm going to have to ask you to—" Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he extracted a worn card, laminated and creased from being carried for 12 years. He walked to the bench and laid it down. "My name is Marcus Hayes, Your Honor. I'm a member of the New York Bar Association. I'd like to represent Miss Brennan." The courtroom exploded. Laughter first, sharp and mocking. A reporter in the back shouted something about janitors playing lawyer. Diana Pierce actually laughed out loud, a sound of pure derision. Judge Holloway picked up the bar license and examined it. Her expression shifted from annoyance to surprise to something Marcus couldn't quite read. "Mr. Hayes," her voice cut through the chaos. "Approach." Marcus walked to the bench. Behind him, the courtroom buzzed with speculation and mockery. He ignored all of it. Judge Holloway spoke quietly, for his ears only. "This license is valid. But Mr. Hayes, according to the date here, you've been a member for 18 years. When did you last practice law?" 12 years ago, Your Honor." 12 years? "Yes, Your Honor. I was disbarred in 2013. It took 4 years to clear my name and be reinstated. Since then, I've worked as maintenance staff in this courthouse." "You're the janitor." "Yes, Your Honor. But I've watched every major trial in this courtroom for the past 12 years. I know the law. I know procedure. I've kept up with my continuing legal education requirements, and I know what justice looks like when it's failing." Judge Holloway studied him for a long moment. Behind them, Diana Pierce was objecting loudly, calling this a mockery of the judicial system, demanding that the court refuse to allow such an obvious farce. The judge silenced her with a look. Then she turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Hayes, I cannot deny a defendant legal representation when that representation holds a valid bar license. However, I must ask, are you competent to handle a case of this magnitude and complexity?" Marcus met her eyes. "Your Honor, this woman deserves a defense. She deserves someone who will fight for her. I can do that. Whether I do it in a $1,000 suit or a maintenance uniform doesn't change the law." For the first time in 12 years, Marcus saw respect in someone's eyes when they looked at him. Judge Holloway turned to Catherine Brennan. "Miss Brennan, do you accept Mr. Hayes as your counsel?" Every eye in the courtroom turned to the billionaire. She stared at Marcus with an expression that was part confusion, part desperation, part something else he couldn't quite name. Time seemed to stretch. The air in the courtroom grew heavy with anticipation. Finally, Catherine Brennan stood. Her voice rang out clear and certain. "Yes, Your Honor, I accept Mr. Hayes." The courtroom erupted again, but Judge Holloway's gavel cut through the noise. "Very well. Mr. Hayes, you have 15 minutes to confer with your client. Do not waste them. This trial begins at 10 o'clock sharp." Marcus sat down at the defense table for the first time in 12 years. The chair felt foreign and familiar at once, like returning to a childhood home to find all the furniture rearranged. Catherine Brennan leaned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" "Because what's happening here isn't justice. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know your lawyers abandoned you 12 hours before trial. I know the prosecution has documents they shouldn't have access to. I know something is very wrong, and I know you need help. Her eyes searched his face. How do you know what documents they have? I clean this courthouse, Miss Brennan. I see things people don't notice when they think no one important is watching. Last week, I saw Diana Pierce reviewing research files with your company's logo on them. Files that should have been protected by attorney-client privilege. Brennan's face went pale. That's impossible. Those files are on private servers with two-factor authentication, which means someone with access gave them to the prosecution. Marcus glanced toward the gallery where Rachel Morrison sat, her hands twisting in her lap. Brennan followed his gaze, and he saw understanding dawn in her eyes, followed immediately by denial. No, Rachel's been with me for 5 years. She would never. We'll discuss that later. Right now, I need you to tell me about the technology. Pretend I'm a high school graduate. Explain it simply. Brennan took a breath, forcing herself to focus. Quantum computing. Traditional quantum computers require temperatures near absolute zero, essentially frozen in liquid helium. My processor operates at room temperature. It uses quantum decay as part of the computational process instead of trying to suppress it. Applications? Computing speeds increase by a factor of 1,000 or more. Revolutionary advances in energy storage and conversion. Medical imaging, drug discovery, and she hesitated. It could render fossil fuels obsolete within 20 years. Marcus went very still. Say that again. If my technology scales successfully, renewable energy storage becomes economically viable. Grid-level implementation could reduce fossil fuel dependence by 40% within 15 years. How much is the fossil fuel industry worth annually in the United States? Revenues exceed $28 billion for the major companies alone. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Pieces were clicking into place, a pattern emerging from what had seemed like chaos. Miss Brennan, this isn't a patent dispute. This is corporate warfare. What do you mean? Your technology threatens to destroy a $28 billion industry. They're not trying to win this case. They're trying to destroy you before your technology can destroy them. Brennan stared at him. That's paranoid. Is it? Your lawyers vanish. Evidence that should be confidential ends up with prosecutors. Your assistant, someone you've trusted for 5 years, is terrified every time she looks at you. You're about to tell me this is all coincidence? Before Brennan could respond, the clerk called out, 5 minutes, Your Honor. Marcus pulled out his legal pad. His hand moved across the page, notes flowing in the shorthand he'd developed years ago. Timeline, evidence chain, witness list, gaps in the prosecution's case, questions that needed answers. Miss Brennan, do you have your original research notebooks? Yes, 12 years of work, handwritten, dated, notarized. Why didn't your previous attorneys present them? She looked confused. They said they weren't necessary, that they had a better strategy. Marcus's jaw tightened. Not presenting your strongest evidence isn't a strategy. It's sabotage. Time, Mr. Hayes, Judge Holloway called. Marcus stood. The worn fabric of his maintenance uniform felt suddenly conspicuous, but he pushed the self-consciousness aside. The law didn't care what you wore. Justice was supposed to be blind. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now hear opening statements. Mr. Hayes, you may proceed. Marcus walked to the podium. No notes, no rehearsal, just the truth as he understood it. The courtroom fell silent. Every eye was on him. The janitor in the maintenance uniform, standing where lawyers in $1,000 suits belonged. He began, Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Marcus Hayes. 15 minutes ago, I was mopping the floor of this courtroom. Low murmurs rippled through the gallery. Marcus didn't pause. I understand how that sounds. I understand the questions running through your minds right now. Is this man competent? Is this some kind of joke? Can a janitor really defend someone in federal court? He gripped the podium, his voice steady and clear. But let me tell you what I've learned in 12 years of cleaning these floors. I've watched hundreds of trials. I've seen justice work. And I've seen justice fail. I've seen the truth triumph. And I've seen the truth buried beneath lies so polished they look like facts. Diana Pierce shifted in her seat, her confident smile wavering slightly. Catherine Brennan didn't steal anything. She created something revolutionary. 12 years of work, alone, in a studio apartment smaller than most of your closets, with nothing but her mind, her determination, and a laptop she bought with student loan money. Marcus gestured toward the prosecution table. Over the next few days, you'll hear testimony. You'll see evidence. Some of it will be lies dressed up as truth. Some of it will be truth that someone desperately wants you to ignore. He paused, letting the words settle. Your job is simple. Separate the lies from the truth. Listen carefully. Watch the witnesses. Ask yourselves who benefits from Catherine Brennan being destroyed. Ask yourselves who has the power and money to make that happen. And when you have asked those questions, the answer will be clear. Marcus looked each juror in the eye one by one. I stand before you today, not because I'm qualified or impressive or because I wear expensive suits. I stand here because Catherine Brennan deserves what every defendant deserves. Someone who will fight for the truth. And I promise you, by the end of this trial, you'll know exactly what the truth is. He returned to the defense table. The courtroom was silent. Then slowly one juror nodded. Just a small movement, barely perceptible, but Marcus saw it. Diana Pierce rose for her opening statement. Her smile was back, sharp and confident. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defense would like you to believe this case is complicated. It's not. She walked toward the jury box, her movements practiced and smooth. This is a case about theft, pure and simple. Catherine Brennan stole proprietary technology from Nexus Tech Innovations. She used her connections in the technology industry to gain access to internal research. She copied designs. She filed patents under her own name. And when she was caught, she hired expensive lawyers to hide behind legal maneuvering. Pierce gestured toward Marcus without looking at him, the dismissiveness clear in her body language. Now those lawyers have apparently abandoned her, and she's resorted to a pause perfectly timed, creative alternatives, but no amount of sympathy or theatrics changes the facts. She turned back to the jury. We will prove Catherine Brennan's guilt with documents, expert testimony, and witness statements. By the end of this trial, you'll have no choice but to find her guilty of intellectual property theft, corporate espionage, and fraud. Pierce sat down, radiating confidence. Judge Holloway consulted her notes. The prosecution may call its first witness. The prosecution calls Dr. Leonard Hartwell. The courtroom doors opened. A man in his 50s entered, wearing a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. He looked every inch the academic expert, slightly rumpled, intellectually distinguished, eminently credible. Marcus watched him take the oath, watched him settle into the witness chair with practiced ease. This was a man comfortable with testimony, comfortable with performance. Diana Pierce led him through his credentials. PhD in quantum physics from Stanford, 15 years of research experience, publications in peer-reviewed journals, consulting work with major technology companies. Dr. Hartwell, did you develop quantum computing algorithms for Nexus Tech Innovations? Yes, I did. Can you describe that work for the jury? Hartwell launched into an explanation, technical but accessible, describing algorithms and computational processes. He spoke with authority, with certainty, with the absolute conviction of someone telling the truth. And when did you develop these algorithms? From January 2018 through March 2019, approximately 15 months of intensive research. Did you document your work? Extensively, lab notebooks, digital files, email correspondence with the Nexus Tech team? Pierce introduced exhibits, documents that looked legitimate, detailed, convincing. The jury paid close attention, several taking notes. Dr. Hartwell, have you reviewed Catherine Brennan's patent applications for her quantum processor? Yes, I have. And what did you find? Hartwell's expression turned somber. Significant similarities to my work. In some cases, nearly identical algorithmic structures. In your expert opinion, could these similarities be coincidental? No, the probability of independent development resulting in such similar outcomes is statistically negligible. Pierce let that statement hang in the air. Then, satisfied, she turned to Marcus. Your witness, Mr. Hayes. Marcus stood. He picked up a single folder from the defense table and approached the witness stand. Hartwell watched him with barely concealed condescension, the way an acclaimed professor might regard a particularly dim student. Dr. Hartwell, you testified that you developed quantum algorithms from January 2018 through March 2019. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. 15 months of work? Approximately, yes. Marcus opened the folder and pulled out a document. Doctor, this is your employment record with Quantum Core Technologies, Miss Brennan's company. Would you please read your start date for the court? Hartwell glanced at the document. His face changed, color draining away. Doctor, Marcus prompted, your start date? Hartwell's voice came out slightly strangled. April 15th, 2019. April 15th, 2019. And you testified your algorithm development ended in March 2019? I consulted before my official employment date. Show me the consulting contract. Silence. Doctor, you can't show me a consulting contract because there isn't one, is there? You couldn't have developed algorithms ending in March 2019 because you weren't employed until 6 weeks later. Diana Pierce shot to her feet. Objection, Your Honor. The defense is badgering the witness. Overruled. The witness will answer the question. Marcus didn't give Hartwell time to formulate a response. He pulled out a second document. Doctor, these are server logs from Quantum Core Technologies research database. They show the quantum decay algorithms, the ones you claim to have developed, were completed and uploaded on March 1st, 2019, more than 6 weeks before you were hired. How did you contribute to code that existed before you arrived at the company? Hartwell's hands gripped the witness chair arms. The dates must be incorrect. Server logs don't lie, Doctor. They're automatically generated with timestamps that can't be altered. Marcus pulled out a third document. This is a publication from the Campaign Finance Disclosure Database. It shows that Nexus Tech Industries donated $280,000 to your university's quantum computing department 2 weeks before you agreed to testify in this case. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to type. Several jurors leaned forward, expressions shifting from attention to suspicion. Judge Holloway's gavel cracked down. Order, Marcus pressed forward. Doctor, that's not a research grant. That's payment for testimony. You're being paid to lie under oath. Objection! Diana Pierce's voice rang out sharp and desperate. Your Honor, this is completely improper. The defense is making accusations without foundation. Your Honor, Marcus turned to the bench. The campaign finance database is public record. I can provide the full documentation if needed. The timing of this donation, $280,000 to a department that doesn't even conduct quantum computing research, is more than suspicious. It's a smoking gun. Judge Holloway's expression had gone from interested to concerned to something approaching anger. Dr. Hartwell, did you receive financial compensation from Nexus Tech Industries or any related entities in exchange for your testimony? Hartwell's face was now completely white. The donation was to support research and education. Answer the question, Doctor. Did you receive money? The university received, yes or no, Doctor? Yes, but Judge Holloway cut him off. Hartwell, you are ordered to remain available for further examination. This court takes allegations of perjury extremely seriously. Mr. Hayes, do you have additional questions at this time? Just one, Your Honor. Marcus looked at Hartwell. Doctor, in September 2019, you published a paper in the Journal of Applied Physics. In that paper, you described yourself as newly exploring the possibilities of quantum computational theory. Would you like to explain how you were newly exploring quantum computing in September 2019 when you claimed to have been developing advanced algorithms in that field throughout 2018? Hartwell opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. No further questions. Marcus returned to the defense table. Behind him, the courtroom buzzed with energy. Catherine Brennan stared at him with an expression that mixed shock, gratitude, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Judge Holloway banged her gavel again. We'll take a 15-minute recess. Dr. Hartwell, you are excused for now, but you will make yourself available for recall. Ms. Pierce, I'd like to see you in my chambers. As the courtroom emptied, Diana Pierce shot Marcus a look that could have melted steel. He met her gaze steadily. This was just the beginning. The hallway outside courtroom 302 was chaos. Reporters surrounded Marcus and Catherine Brennan, shouting questions, trying to get quotes. Marcus put a gentle hand on Brennan's elbow, guiding her through the crowd toward a quiet alcove near the windows. Once they had relative privacy, Brennan turned to face him. Up close, away from the formality of the courtroom, she looked younger and more vulnerable. How did you know about the payment to Hartwell? I didn't, not for certain, but the timing of his testimony was suspicious, and companies like Nexus Tech don't operate without leaving paper trails. I took a calculated risk. You bluffed. In court, sometimes you aim and pray. His reaction told me I'd hit the target. For the first time since he'd met her, Catherine Brennan smiled. It was small, barely there, but genuine. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Don't thank me yet. We've barely started. They'll regroup and come back harder. I know, but for the first time in weeks, I feel like someone is actually fighting for me. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Dad, I saw the news. What are you doing? Call me now. He texted back, can't talk. In trial. I'm okay. Her response came immediately. You're not okay. You're a janitor representing a billionaire in federal court. This is insane, trust me. I know what I'm doing. Do you? Or are you trying to be the hero again? Remember what happened last time? Marcus put the phone away without responding. Sophie was right to worry. The last time he'd played hero, he'd lost everything. But watching Catherine Brennan stand alone in that courtroom, abandoned by everyone she'd trusted, he hadn't been able to walk away. Some lessons you learn. Some lessons you ignored because the alternative was living with yourself afterward. Court reconvened at 2 o'clock. Judge Holloway looked displeased as she took her seat. Diana Pierce looked even more displeased, her earlier confidence replaced by barely contained anger. The prosecution calls its next witness. The afternoon proceeded with more expert testimony, more documents, more attempts to build a case against Catherine Brennan. But Marcus noticed something. The witnesses were less confident now. Diana Pierce's questions were more careful, more hedged. The prosecution had been rattled. Marcus cross-examined each witness methodically, finding small contradictions, exposing gaps in testimony. He wasn't destroying them the way he destroyed Hartwell, but he was chipping away at the prosecution's case, creating reasonable doubt. At 5 o'clock, Judge Holloway called an end to the day's proceedings. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. Mr. Hayes, I expect you to be properly attired. Marcus looked down at his maintenance uniform. Yes, Your Honor, I apologize. I'll take care of it. In truth, he had no idea how he'd take care of it. The only suit he owned had been sitting in his closet for 12 years, and even if it still fit after years of physical labor, it would be hopelessly out of style. As they left the courthouse, Catherine Brennan fell into step beside him. Mr. Hayes, we need to talk. Really talk. Not 15-minute consultations between court sessions. I have to work tonight. Janitorial shift runs 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. She stopped walking. You're still working as a janitor? It's my job, Miss Brennan. I don't get paid to defend you. This is pro bono, which means I still need to earn rent. I'll pay you, whatever your rate is. No. Mr. Hayes, if this were about money, I wouldn't have stood up this morning. I'm doing this because it's right, because you deserve a defense, because the law is supposed to be about justice, not whoever can afford the most expensive attorneys. Catherine Brennan studied him with those sharp blue eyes. You're a very unusual man, Mr. Hayes. I'm just a man who knows what it's like to have the system destroy you. I won't let it happen to someone else if I can prevent it. She pulled out a business card and wrote on the back, "That's my personal number. Come to my apartment tonight after your shift. Bring your daughter if she's available. We have a lot to discuss, and I suspect we're going to need all the help we can get." Marcus took the card. The address was in Tribeca, probably one of those multi-million-dollar penthouses he'd only seen in magazines. Miss Brennan, I don't think... Kate. Call me Kate. And Mr. Hayes, you're right that something is very wrong with this case. If we're going to fight it, we need to understand what we're fighting. Come tonight, please. She walked away before he could refuse, her security detail falling into step around her. Marcus stood on the courthouse steps, watching her disappear into a waiting car. His phone buzzed again. Sophie calling this time instead of texting. He answered, "Hey, sweetheart. Dad, what the hell is going on? You're all over the news. Janitor turned lawyer. Courtroom Cinderella story. David versus Goliath. This is insane." I know how it sounds. Do you? Because it sounds like you're throwing away 12 years of stability for some billionaire who probably has a dozen lawyers who could defend her. She doesn't. They all abandoned her. That's not your problem. Marcus closed his eyes. Sophie, I can't explain it over the phone. Can you meet me tonight? Around 2:30 a.m. There's someone I want you to meet. 2:30 in the morning? I have to work my shift first, but there's something happening here, something bigger than just a lawsuit, and I need your help to figure it out. Silence on the other end. Then reluctantly, fine, but Dad, if this blows up in your face again, I know, I love you, Sophie. I love you too. Even when you're being stupidly noble. She hung up. Marcus pocketed his phone and headed toward the subway. He had 4 hours before his janitorial shift started, just enough time to grab food and try to find something approximating a decent suit. As he walked, he didn't notice the man in the gray sedan parked across the street, photographing him with a long lens. Didn't notice the way the man immediately made a phone call after Marcus disappeared into the subway station. The pieces were moving, the game was accelerating, and Marcus Hayes had just painted a target on his back that he didn't yet know existed. The subway car rattled through darkness beneath Manhattan at 2:15 in the morning. Marcus sat with his maintenance cart beside him, the smell of industrial cleaner clinging to his uniform after 8 hours of scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. His back ached. His knees protested every movement. 45 years old, felt closer to 60 after a full janitorial shift following a day in court. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Sophie and a text. Dad, I'm at the address you sent. This place is insane. How does anyone live like this? The Tribeca address Kate had written on her card belonged to a building Marcus had walked past 100 times without ever imagining he'd enter. Glass and steel rose 40 stories into the night sky. A doorman in a uniform nicer than anything Marcus owned opened the door before he could reach for it. The lobby was all marble and modern art, the kind of space designed to make regular people feel small. Marcus wheeled his maintenance cart toward the elevator, suddenly aware of every stain on his uniform, every scuff on his shoes. Sir? The doorman's voice was polite but firm. Service entrance is around back. I'm here to see Catherine Brennan, penthouse. The doorman's expression shifted to barely concealed skepticism. He picked up a phone, spoke quietly, then hung up with visible surprise. Ms. Brennan is expecting you, top floor, private elevator on your right. The elevator was bigger than Marcus's bathroom. It rose so smoothly he barely felt the motion. Just watched the numbers climb. 10, 20, 30, 40. The doors opened directly into Kate's apartment. Sophie stood in the entrance hall, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder, her face a mix of awe and discomfort. Dad, this is ridiculous. The bathroom is bigger than our entire apartment. Kate appeared from deeper in the penthouse, no longer in her courtroom armor. Jeans and a cashmere sweater, hair down around her shoulders, feet bare. She looked younger this way, more human, less like a photograph from a business magazine. Mr. Hayes, Sophie, thank you for coming. I know the hour is unreasonable. Marcus noticed the dark circles under Kate's eyes, the way her hands moved restlessly. She hadn't slept either. You said we needed to talk. I've been going through my files since court ended. Mr. Hayes, you were right. Someone's been feeding information to the prosecution. Documents that should have been protected, research that was encrypted, internal communications that never should have left my company. It's all there in their evidence folders. Sophie was already pulling out her laptop. Show me. I can trace data breaches if I know what to look for. Kate led them to her home office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, lights spreading out like a constellation fallen to earth. 3 monitors on a glass desk, file boxes stacked against one wall. For the next 2 hours they worked. Kate pulled documents. Sophie traced digital signatures, tracked file access logs, built a timeline of information leaks. Marcus reviewed the prosecution's evidence against what Kate had actually produced, marking discrepancies. noting impossible access points. At 4:30 in the morning, Sophie leaned back from her computer with a low whistle. Dad, you need to see this. Her screen showed a complex web of corporate structures. Shell companies nested inside holding companies, nested inside more shells. Names deliberately obscure and forgettable. Nexus Tech Innovations, incorporated in Delaware 2021, owned by Tech Ventures Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands, which is owned by... Sophie clicked. A new name appeared, Titan Energy Industries. The room went very cold. Marcus felt his chest constrict. 13 years of carefully maintained equilibrium shattering in an instant. Kate looked between them, sensing the shift in atmosphere. What's Titan Energy? Marcus's voice came out rough. The company that destroyed me, he told them. 15 years ago, the whistleblower case, the electrical engineer who'd discovered safety violations at Titan Energy's offshore drilling operation. 3 workers dead because management had ignored repeated warnings about faulty equipment. Evidence that had vanished from Marcus's office safe the night before trial. 4 years fighting to clear his name while Sarah grew weaker and Sophie learned to be afraid of hope. They accused me of fabricating documents, said I'd invented the evidence to destroy an honest company. By the time I proved the truth, Sarah was gone and my reputation was ashes. Kate's expression had shifted from curiosity to understanding to something darker. They're doing it again, using the legal system as a weapon. Not just legal. Sophie pulled up more files. Look at this. Kate's law firm, Preston, Whitmore and Associates. The managing partner, Gerald Whitmore, sits on the board of Atlas Energy Solutions. Never heard of them. That's the point. Atlas is a subsidiary of Titan Energy. Kate, your lawyers were getting paid by the company trying to destroy you. $2 million transferred 3 months ago, classified as consulting fees. Kate sat down heavily. Gerald recommended his firm personally. He said they specialized in intellectual property defense. Her voice trailed off as the implications crystallized. He was sabotaging me from the beginning. Marcus pulled out his legal pad, already writing. We need to document everything, every connection, every payment, every suspicious timing. This isn't just a patent case anymore. Sophie kept digging, fingers flying across the keyboard. There's more. Rachel Morrison, your chief of staff. She received $50,000 3 months ago from a shell company that traces back to Nexus Tech. Then $75,000 last month. Kate's face went pale. No, Rachel wouldn't. We've been through too much together. Look at the timing. Every major leak corresponds to a payment. Every time the prosecution got confidential information, money moved into Rachel's account days later. There has to be another explanation. Sophie pulled up a news article from 10 years earlier, archived and nearly forgotten. Rachel Morrison, former financial analyst at TechBridge Solutions, implicated in embezzlement scheme. $50,000 missing. Company declined to prosecute after funds were repaid. Kate stood abruptly and walked to the windows, arms wrapped around herself. Manhattan stretched below, indifferent to human drama. I gave her a second chance. Everyone else in the industry knew about the embezzlement. No one would hire her. I didn't care about her past. I cared about who she was trying to become. They found her weakness. Marcus joined Kate at the window. Blackmail is effective because it targets people who've already made mistakes. Rachel wasn't evil. She was scared. Should I confront her? Not yet. Right now, she thinks she's hidden. If we tip our hand too early, whoever's running this operation will adjust their strategy. Better to let them think they're winning while we build our case. Sophie closed her laptop with a decisive click. Dad, I need to keep digging, but I can't do it from my apartment. If they're willing to blackmail Kate's assistant and buy off her lawyers, they're watching everyone connected to this case. You should stay away from this entirely. It's too dangerous. Dad. Sophie's voice carried an edge he rarely heard. I'm 20 years old. I get to decide what's too dangerous. And someone needs to trace these connections before more evidence disappears. Before Marcus could argue, his phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor at the courthouse. Hayes, you've been reassigned to night custodial at the municipal building effective immediately. Report tomorrow at 6 p.m. He stared at the message. 12 years in the same position, never a complaint, never a missed shift. And now, the day after he'd stood up in court, suddenly he was being transferred to a different building on a different shift. Sophie read his expression. They're isolating you, making it harder for you to observe the trial, harder for you to prepare. Or they're sending a message. Step back or lose more than just a convenient work assignment. Kate turned from the window. On the view are staying here. This building has security, 24-hour concierge, cameras in every hallway. They can't threaten you if they can't get close. Marcus shook his head automatically. Miss Brennan? Kate. Kate, I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's strategy. You said yourself they're targeting everyone connected to this case. Your apartment was probably already compromised. Sophie's digital security is clearly at risk. This isn't about pride, it's about survival. Sophie was already nodding. She's right, Dad. I can't do effective research if I'm worried about you every second. The guest house has 3 bedrooms. Kate's tone suggested the decision was already made. Separate building on my estate in Westchester. Private, secure, and close enough that we can work together without wasting hours on transit. Unless your pride is more important than winning this case. Marcus wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed that accepting help meant owing debts he couldn't repay. But Sophie's expectant face, Kate's unflinching gaze, and the growing certainty that Titan Energy wasn't playing by rules that included mercy made the choice for him. Just until the trial ends. Agreed. Agreed. I'll have my driver take you both to Queens to pack essentials. You'll be moved in by noon. The guest house was absurd. 3 bedrooms when Marcus needed one. A kitchen with appliances he didn't know how to operate. Living room furniture that probably cost more than he'd earned in a year. Sophie immediately claimed the bedroom with the best Wi-Fi signal and set up her equipment, transforming elegant simplicity into digital command center chaos within minutes. Marcus stood in the main living area, hands in his pockets, feeling like an imposter in someone else's life. Through the windows, he could see the main house where Kate lived, a testament to wealth he couldn't begin to comprehend. His phone buzzed. A text from his landlord with an attached photo. His apartment had been ransacked. Drawers emptied onto floors, mattress slashed open, closet torn apart. Nothing stolen because there was nothing worth stealing, but the message was clear enough. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her own phone in hand. My laptop was hacked, remotely. Whoever did it left a file on my desktop. Just one sentence. Stop digging or get buried. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. They're escalating. Which means we're close to something they're desperate to hide. Or they're trying to scare us into making mistakes. Kate arrived an hour later with coffee from somewhere expensive. The kind that came in cups with names written in marker. She changed back into work clothes, armor reassembled. Your apartment is being professionally cleaned and secured. New locks, security camera, the works. Consider it part of your legal fees. I told you I'm not accepting payment. Then consider it me protecting my attorney. Either way, it's done. She set the coffee down with finality that suggested argument was pointless. Now we need to prepare for tomorrow. The prosecution will come back harder after what you did to their first witness. They worked through the afternoon reviewing testimony, anticipating strategies, building responses. Marcus watched Kate transform from vulnerable woman to focused professional, the mask sliding back into place piece by piece. He recognized the pattern. He'd done the same thing for years after Sarah died, rebuilding his armor every morning until he'd almost forgotten there was a person underneath. Evening came with sunset painting the estate in copper and gold. Kate ordered food from somewhere that delivered in real plates, and the 3 of them ate together at the guest house table. It felt strange and normal at once, like playing house in someone else's life. Sophie excused herself to continue research. Kate and Marcus remained at the table, the silence between them shifting from professional to something more complicated. Can I ask you something? Kate's voice was quieter than her courtroom tone. Why did you keep your law license active? The continuing education costs money you clearly don't have. Why not let it lapse? Marcus turned his coffee cup in circles, watching the liquid swirl. Because giving it up would have meant they'd won. Titan Energy took my career, my reputation, most of my time with Sarah before she died. But they couldn't take what I knew. The law was still in my head, still part of who I was. Keeping the license was proof that I hadn't disappeared completely. That's not stubbornness. That's faith. Faith in what? In yourself. In the possibility of second chances. Kate paused, choosing words carefully. My parents died in a car accident 13 years ago. I was 25, just starting quantum core. They were driving to see my first real laboratory, this glorified garage space I'd rented with borrowed money. Drunk driver crossed the center line. They died instantly. Marcus said nothing, knowing sometimes silence was the only appropriate response. I threw myself into work. 18-hour days, 7 days a week. Built an empire because building meant I didn't have to feel. Success became armor. Money became distance. And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be close to anyone. Rachel was the closest thing I had to a friend, and even that was, she gestured vaguely, professional, conditional, safe. You're not as cold as you pretend to be. I have to be. The technology industry doesn't reward vulnerability. Female CEOs especially. One moment of perceived weakness and the wolves circle. Marcus understood. He'd built his own walls, different materials, but same purpose. Keeping people at arm's length meant they couldn't see the damage, couldn't ask questions that didn't have good answers. My wife used to say I carried the weight of the world like it was mine alone to bear. The words came out before he could stop them. She was right. Even when she was dying, I tried to handle everything myself, as if asking for help would make me less of a man, less of a husband, less of a father. I failed her by being too proud to admit I was drowning. You didn't fail her. Cancer failed her. I wasn't there enough. I was too busy fighting the Bar Association, trying to prove I hadn't fabricated evidence, trying to clear my name. And while I was fighting for my reputation, I lost the time I had left with the person who actually mattered. Kate reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The gesture was brief, but it carried weight. Thank you for trusting me with that. Before Marcus could respond, Sophie burst through the door with her laptop. I found something big. The second day of trial began with Diana Pierce calling Dr. Amanda Sterling to the stand. The witness was polished, confident, carrying herself with the assurance of someone who'd testified dozens of times. 41 years old, impressive credentials, a demeanor calculated to inspire trust. Sterling testified she'd worked with Kate at MIT, claimed Kate had a pattern of appropriating other people's research, described a history of academic dishonesty that was completely fabricated but sounded devastatingly credible. Marcus approached cross-examination differently this time. No dramatic revelations, no explosive confrontations, just patient, methodical questioning that exposed small contradictions, created accumulating doubt. Dr. Sterling, you testified you and Miss Brennan attended MIT together. What was your graduation year? 2005. And Miss Brennan graduated? 2009. So you weren't classmates. We overlapped, graduate and undergraduate programs. Which professor taught the quantum mechanics course you both attended? Professor Chen, Physics 451. Marcus held up the MIT course catalog. MIT doesn't offer Physics 451. That course number doesn't exist. And Professor Chen retired in 2003, 2 years before you claimed to have studied under him. Sterling's confidence flickered. I must have misremembered the specifics. It's been years. You also testified you met Miss Brennan at a technology conference in 2014. Which conference? The International Symposium on Quantum Computing, San Francisco. Marcus produced conference records. That symposium was held in Boston that year. San Francisco hosted in 2015. Miss Brennan didn't attend either year because she was in her laboratory in New York, working 20-hour days to develop the technology you now claim she stole. Diana Pierce objected, but the damage was done. The jury watched Sterling with open skepticism now. Marcus introduced Kate's research notebooks, 12 years of handwritten documentation, each page dated and notarized. The juror, who was a retired engineer, examined them with visible interest, nodding as he recognized authentic research methodology. Judge Holloway called lunch recess. Marcus and Kate retreated to an empty conference room. You're doing well, Kate's voice carried cautious optimism. The jury is paying attention. We're winning small battles, But Pierce is setting up something bigger. She's too smart to rely only on witnesses we can destroy. Marcus's instinct proved correct. After lunch, Pierce introduced Nexus Tech's internal research files, thick binders of documentation that allegedly proved their algorithms predated Kate's work. But Sophie had spent the morning doing exactly what Marcus had anticipated. She'd analyzed the metadata on every digital file the prosecution had submitted. Marcus requested a brief recess and called the court's digital forensics expert to examine the files. The expert's testimony was dry, technical, and devastating. These files were created within the last 4 months. The creation dates have been altered to appear older, but the underlying metadata reveals their true origin. Additionally, several files contain formatting artifacts from software versions that didn't exist during the dates they claimed to represent. The courtroom erupted. Judge Holloway's face transformed from judicial neutrality to barely contained fury. Miss Pierce, did your office knowingly present falsified evidence to this court? Diana Pierce looked genuinely shocked. Your Honor, these documents came directly from Nexus Tech's legal team. I had no reason to question their authenticity. Then someone needs to explain how fabricated evidence ended up in a federal prosecution. This trial is recessed until tomorrow morning. Ms. Pierce, I expect you and Nexus Tech's attorneys in my chambers immediately. Mr. Hayes, well done. As they left the courthouse, Marcus noticed Kate's hand trembling slightly. The adrenaline of victory mixing with the reality of how close they'd come to disaster if Sophie hadn't caught the forgery. Kate's driver pulled up to the curb. She reached for the door handle. The SUV that ran the red light came from nowhere. No warning, no hesitation, just pure acceleration aimed directly at Kate's town car. The driver saw it first, his training kicking in instantly. He jerked the wheel hard right. The town car spun, tires screaming, missing the SUV by inches before slamming into a lamp post with a sickening crunch of metal. Marcus was moving before conscious thought, yanking open the crumpled rear door. Kate was conscious, bleeding from a cut above her eye, airbag powder coating her suit. I'm okay. I think I'm okay. The driver was worse, slumped over the deflated steering wheel, but breathing. Marcus's phone was already out, calling 911, his hands steadier than they should have been. The SUV had fled, no license plate visible, windows tinted, too dark to see the driver. Police arrived first, then ambulances. Kate refused to go to the hospital initially, insisted she was fine, but Marcus saw the shock setting in, the way her pupils were dilating wrong. You're going to the hospital. That's not negotiable. For once, Kate didn't argue. The emergency room was chaos organized into systems. Kate had a concussion, fractured rib, various bruises and cuts. The driver had a broken arm and head trauma, but would recover. Marcus sat in the waiting area, watching doctors and nurses move with practiced efficiency, and felt the weight of responsibility settling heavier on his shoulders. Sophie arrived an hour later, face pale. Dad, the police found the SUV abandoned 3 blocks away. Stolen plates, no identifying features. Professional job. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Because they're desperate. We exposed their fake witnesses, destroyed their fabricated evidence. They're losing in court, so they're switching to different tactics. A detective came through looking for statements. Marcus provided what little he could, knowing it wouldn't lead anywhere. People with enough money to orchestrate corporate fraud had enough money to cover their tracks on attempted vehicular homicide. Kate was released near midnight with prescriptions and strict instructions to rest. Marcus and Sophie took her back to the estate, where security had been quietly doubled while they were at the hospital. The main house felt too empty, too cold. Kate moved slowly, pain medication dulling the sharpest edges, but leaving her floating in a haze of exhaustion and delayed shock. Sophie went to make tea. Kate sat on the sofa, staring at nothing. They tried to kill me. Marcus sat beside her, maintaining careful distance. Yes, this is about more than patents or lawsuits or money. They want me dead. They want you silent. There's a difference, even if the end result looks the same. I built this technology to help people, to solve energy problems, to make computing accessible, to push science forward. And because of that, someone thinks I deserve to die? You threaten a $28 billion industry. They're not trying to kill Catherine Brennan, the person. They're trying to eliminate Catherine Brennan, the obstacle. Kate turned to look at him, really look at him, seeing past the janitor costume to the man underneath. You're not scared. I'm terrified, but fear and action aren't mutually exclusive. You can be afraid and still move forward. That's what courage actually is. Sophie returned with tea that smelled like chamomile and honey. Kate sipped it mechanically, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. I'm going to destroy them. Her voice was soft, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. Titan Energy, Nexus Tech, everyone involved. I'm going to take apart their conspiracy piece by piece and make sure the world knows what they did. Marcus recognized that tone. It was the same one he'd used 15 years ago when he'd promised the whistleblower he'd get justice. The same one that had led to his career's destruction and his wife's last years stolen by legal warfare. Revenge is expensive, Kate. Sometimes the price is higher than you can afford. Then I'll pay it. They tried to kill me tonight. They blackmailed my assistant, bought my lawyers, fabricated evidence, and sent a 2-ton weapon to crush me on a public street. This stopped being about patents the moment they decided I didn't deserve to exist. Sophie set down her own tea. Then we need to think strategically. Emotional responses are what they're expecting. We need to be smarter, faster, more careful than they can anticipate. The three of them sat in the living room, plotting strategy until the early morning hours. Outside, security guards patrolled grounds that had become a fortress. Inside, they built plans that would either save them all or destroy what little remained of their carefully reconstructed lives. Rachel Morrison appeared at the estate gate at 2:15 in the morning, disheveled and terrified. Security called the main house. Kate, still awake despite the pain medication, authorized her entry with visible reluctance. They met in the guest house rather than Kate's home. Marcus insisted on neutral territory, somewhere with multiple exits and witnesses. Sophie sat up in the corner with her laptop, recording everything. Rachel looked like she'd aged a decade in a day. Makeup smeared, hair tangled, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone she'd brought. I'm sorry, God, Kate, I'm so sorry. Kate's expression was carved from ice. For what specifically? Stealing my files? Giving my research to my enemies? Helping them build a case designed to destroy me? You'll need to be more specific. All of it. Everything. 6 months of betraying you, 6 months of lies. I'm sorry. Why? Rachel told them. The embezzlement 10 years ago, the shame she'd carried, the fear that haunted every background check. Richard Stanton finding out, approaching her with documents that could send her to prison, offering a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. He knew about my sister. Cerebral palsy needs full-time care. I'm her guardian. Prison would destroy her life, not just mine. So I chose her over you, and I've hated myself every single day since. Marcus interrupted. Why are you here now? What changed? Rachel's hands clenched around the phone she'd brought. I heard them. This afternoon, Stanton on a call. He said the trial wasn't working fast enough, that they needed a permanent solution. I asked what that meant. He said it meant Catherine Brennan wouldn't walk out of the courthouse alive. The room went very quiet. I helped them plan it, not intentionally, but I knew your schedule, your routes, your security protocols. They used information I provided to try to kill you. And I can't, her voice broke. I can't live with that. I won't. She held out the phone. This is Stanton's. He left it in a meeting this morning. I copied everything before I returned it. Messages, emails, call logs, everything. The entire conspiracy is here. Marcus took the phone carefully as if it might explode. Sophie was already pulling out cables to create an offline backup. Who else is involved? Titan Energy executives, your former law firm's managing partner, Senator Howard Billings from the Energy Committee. 23 people in total that I counted. They've been planning this for over a year, since before they even filed the lawsuit. Kate remained frozen, processing the magnitude of betrayal from someone she'd trusted completely. Marcus understood that particular knife wound. It never stopped hurting, even years after the blade was removed. Rachel, you understand what this means? You'll need to testify. In court, under oath, admitting everything you did. You'll face charges yourself. I know. I don't care anymore. I'd rather go to prison knowing I did the right thing than stay free knowing I helped murder someone. Sophie finished backing up the phone's contents to 3 separate encrypted drives. Dad, there's enough here to bury everyone involved. Payment records, planning documents, instructions for fabricating evidence. They weren't even trying to hide their tracks because they thought they'd won before it started. Marcus turned back to Rachel. You're going into FBI protective custody tonight. This information makes you the most valuable witness in the country and the most likely target for silencing. Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. Kate finally moved, standing stiffly, crossing to where Rachel sat. I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I understand why you did it. And I'm grateful you found the courage to stop. I don't deserve your gratitude. Probably not, but you're getting it anyway. Marcus made calls, first to FBI agent David Reeves, who'd been peripherally involved in monitoring Titan Energy for months, then to Judge Holloway's emergency line, requesting an immediate sealed hearing. By 4 in the morning, federal agents had secured Rachel and begun the process of formal witness protection. By 5, Marcus and Kate were sitting in Judge Holloway's chambers with Diana Pierce, who looked like she'd been dragged from bed and forced to confront the reality that her entire case was built on lies. Your Honor, the defense has evidence that this prosecution was orchestrated by Titan Energy Industries as part of a broader conspiracy to eliminate Miss Brennan and suppress her technology. We have documentation of payments to witnesses, falsified evidence creation, and plans for physical harm up to and including murder. Pierce's face had gone gray. Your Honor, I was not aware of any conspiracy. I prosecuted this case in good faith based on evidence provided by the plaintiff. Judge Holloway examined the preliminary documentation Marcus provided. Her expression grew darker with each page. Mr. Hayes, you're alleging crimes that extend far beyond intellectual property theft. Yes, Your Honor, which is why we're requesting this be turned over to federal authorities immediately. This trial has become a cover for something much larger. I'm recusing myself effective immediately. Judge Holloway's voice was carefully neutral, but Marcus heard something underneath. Shame, perhaps, or guilt. Judge Michael Torres will assume jurisdiction. Ms. Pierce, your office needs to determine very quickly whether you are going to continue as prosecutor or become a witness yourself. The next 36 hours blurred together. FBI raids across 4 states, arrests beginning with Richard Stanton and expanding outward like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Media coverage that transformed from courthouse drama into national scandal. Sophie barely slept, coordinating with FBI analysts, providing her research, building the digital architecture that connected every piece of the conspiracy into an undeniable whole. Marcus worked with federal prosecutors, explaining the legal complexities, providing testimony about his own case 15 years earlier, watching the pattern emerge that Titan Energy had been doing this for decades. Kate gave statements, held press conferences, watched her company's stock price recover as the truth emerged. But in quiet moments, Marcus saw the toll it was taking. Trust, once shattered, doesn't repair easily. Judge Torres convened an emergency hearing. The courtroom was even more packed than before. Every journalist in the city fighting for a seat. Given the evidence that has come to light, including witness tampering, evidence fabrication, and conspiracy to commit murder, this court has no choice but to dismiss all charges against Catherine Brennan with prejudice. Furthermore, I am recommending criminal charges against Nexus Tech Innovations, Titan Energy Industries, and all individuals involved in this conspiracy. The gavel came down. Kate was free. They walked out of the courthouse together into a storm of camera flashes and shouted questions. Marcus stayed close, one hand on Kate's elbow, guiding her through the chaos toward the waiting car. Sophie intercepted them halfway down the steps, her face flushed with excitement and exhaustion. Dad, they're already talking about settlements. Kate's lawyers, her new non-corrupt lawyers, estimate she'll be awarded over $600 million in damages. Kate stopped walking. I don't want their money. I want every person involved in prison. You'll get both. Marcus's voice was quiet but certain. Justice doesn't have to choose. They made it to the car. Sophie climbed in first, immediately pulling out her laptop to continue her never-ending research. Marcus and Kate sat in the back seat as the driver navigated away from the media circus. The silence stretched between them, different from before. Not awkward, not professional, but weighted with possibility. Kate spoke first. I've been alone for 13 years by choice. Built walls so high nobody could climb them. Told myself it was strength when it was really just fear. I know the feeling. You climbed them anyway, with a mop and a law degree and no reason to care about me except that you saw someone who needed help. That's not entirely true. I also saw someone worth helping. Kate turned to look at him, really look at him, and Marcus saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not gratitude, not relief, but recognition. One damaged person seeing another and understanding the specific shape of their scars. My therapist would say, this is a terrible time to start a relationship. Trauma bonding, emotional vulnerability, all the classic warning signs. Your therapist would probably be right. But sometimes terrible timing is the only timing you get. And sometimes the people who understand your damage are the only ones worth letting close. Kate smiled, small and genuine, the first real smile he'd seen from her. I have no idea how to do this, dating, relationships, any of it. I'm objectively terrible at being vulnerable. I've been wearing my wedding ring for 13 years because taking it off felt like betraying my dead wife. I think we're both disasters. Maybe disasters recognize each other. Sophie's voice floated from the front seat without looking up from her laptop. If you two are done being emotionally constipated, can we talk about the fact that someone left a passage at the estate gate addressed to Dad? The moment shattered. Marcus's hand moved automatically to his phone. What kind of package? Security scanned it. It's safe, just a folder with documents inside. But Dad, the return address is from James Brennan, Titan Energy's former vice president. The name hit Marcus like a fist to the stomach. James Brennan, the man who'd sat in the gallery 15 years ago, watching Marcus's career burn. The architect of the evidence theft that had destroyed everything. What's in the folder? Legal documents. A new lawsuit. Against Kate. Different technology, different claims, but same goal. And guess who's representing the plaintiff as private counsel? Marcus didn't need to guess. The game hadn't ended. It had just evolved. Kate's hand found his in the darkness of the car, her grip strong despite the exhaustion. Round two? Round two. The car pulled through the estate gates. Ahead, the guest house lights glowed warm against the night. Behind them, the city stretched out with all its dangers and possibilities. Above, stars barely visible through light pollution marked paths through darkness. They'd won this battle. But wars were made of battles strung together like beads on an endless string, and Titan Energy had resources that made even defeat look like strategic retreat. Marcus thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to keep fighting. Thought about Sophie, determined to finish what they'd started. Thought about Kate, whose walls were beginning to crack just enough to let light through. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tonight they had survived. Sometimes survival was enough. Sometimes it was everything. 2 years had passed since the gavel fell in courtroom 302. 2 years of rebuilding what had been torn down, of constructing new foundations from the rubble of old battles. 2 years of learning that victory wasn't an ending, but a different kind of beginning. Marcus Hayes stood in the office on Fifth Avenue, watching late afternoon sun paint the walls in shades of copper and gold. The sign outside read Hayes and Hayes Law in letters that caught the light and threw it back transformed. A beacon visible from the street below, where people walked past carrying briefcases and ambitions and the particular exhaustion of New York City at the end of a workday. The office smelled of fresh paint and possibility. New furniture still carried tags hidden beneath cushions. File cabinets waited to be filled with the documentation of justice pursued and occasionally achieved. On the wall behind what would be the reception desk, framed headlines told the story they'd lived through. Janitor lawyer exposes billion-dollar conspiracy. Titan Energy executive sentenced. Catherine Brennan awarded $640 million in landmark case. Sophie appeared in the doorway with coffee from the place downstairs that charged $6 for what used to cost 99 cents at the bodega near their old Queens apartment. She'd turned 22 last month, though she carried herself with the confidence of someone much older. Her NYU data science degree had led her somewhere unexpected. Columbia Law School, where she'd just completed her final semester, graduating summa cum laude with job offers from firms that would have paid more in signing bonuses than Marcus had earned in 5 years of mopping floors. She'd turned them all down to be here, in this office that didn't exist yet, except as an idea and a lease agreement in the kind of stubborn faith that ran in families. First client arrives in 20 minutes. Jessica Morales, single mother, 2 kids, fired from her nursing job 3 days after she reported a doctor for falsifying patient records. Marcus accepted the coffee, bitter and strong, the way he'd learned to drink it during those years when sugar and cream felt like luxuries he couldn't justify. Then she came to the right place. Sophie smiled, the expression carrying echoes of Sarah in the curve of her mouth, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. That's what we tell them. Question is whether we can deliver. We delivered for Kate. Kate had $14 billion in a conspiracy so obvious it practically wore a sign. Jessica Morales has $800 in her checking account and a hospital that's very good at covering its tracks. Then we'll have to be better at uncovering them. The trial's conclusion had been swift once Rachel Morrison took the stand. Her testimony under oath, with federal marshals flanking the witness box and her hands shaking so badly, the court reporter had to ask her twice to speak louder, had exposed every thread of the conspiracy Titan Energy had woven. The phone she'd stolen from Richard Stanton, evidence obtained illegally but admissible under federal whistleblower protections, contained documentation that left no room for interpretation or doubt. Judge Michael Torres had dismissed all charges against Catherine Brennan within 48 hours of Rachel's testimony. The words still echoed in Marcus's memory. This court has been used as a weapon by parties who view justice as something to be purchased rather than pursued. Miss Brennan, you have this court's apology. The FBI arrests followed like dominoes falling in slow motion, each one triggering the next. Richard Stanton, 15 years for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Senator Howard Billings' resignation and facing 23 federal charges that would likely keep him in legal proceedings until he was too old to remember why he'd sold his integrity in the first place. 7 Titan Energy executives, prison sentences ranging from 8 to 12 years. Their corner offices and expense accounts traded for cells and supervised recreation time. The settlement came 6 months after the trial ended. $640 million in damages. A number so large it stopped meaning anything concrete and became instead a symbol of accountability finally extracted from power. Kate had donated half immediately to organizations fighting corporate corruption and climate change. The rest went into the Lockhart Justice Fund, which had grown from Kate's initial $15 million to something approaching $100 million as other tech CEOs who'd followed the trial added their own contributions. Hayes & Hayes Law was the fund's first major project. Offices in New York, with plans for Chicago and Los Angeles by next year. Attorneys who specialized in cases no one else would touch because the defendants were too poor, the opponents too powerful, the odds too long. They won more than they lost. Not every time, not perfectly, but enough that word was spreading through communities that had learned not to trust promises made by people in expensive suits. 47 cases in 2 years. 44 victories. 3 losses that taught them more than the wins ever could. Lessons about when to compromise and when to dig in harder. Jessica Morales arrived at precisely 3 o'clock, dressed in scrubs that suggested she'd come straight from a shift at a different hospital, one willing to hire her despite the black mark on her record from her previous employer. She was 34, with exhaustion carved into her face and determination burning behind her eyes. Marcus and Sophie sat across from her in the conference room. The table between them scattered with documents in the careful notes Sophie had already compiled from their phone intake. Miss Morales, tell us what happened. From the beginning. Jessica's hands twisted in her lap. I've been a nurse for 12 years. Good reviews, no disciplinary actions. Patients liked me. 6 months ago, I noticed Dr. Chen was signing off on procedures he hadn't performed. Physical therapy sessions, specialist consultations, things insurance would pay for, but that never actually happened. Did you confront him? I documented everything first. Took photos of schedules, kept logs of which patients were supposed to receive care versus which ones actually did. Then I went to the head of nursing with a full report. Sophie leaned forward. And then? Nothing. For 2 weeks, absolutely nothing. I thought maybe they were investigating quietly. Then I got called into HR. They said my performance had been declining, that multiple patients had complained about my care, that I was being terminated effective immediately for conduct unbecoming a medical professional. Marcus had heard variations of this story 100 times. The whistleblower who reported wrongdoing only to find themselves transformed into the problem, their reputation destroyed as warning to anyone else who might consider speaking up. Do you still have the documentation? Jessica pulled a thumb drive from her purse. Everything. Photos, logs, patient records I accessed legally as part of my job. Emails between administrators that I was copied on before they fired me. It's all here. Sophie took the drive and plugged it into her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes scanning files with the speed of someone who'd spent 2 years learning to trace digital conspiracies. This is solid. Miss Morales, with this evidence, we can file a wrongful termination suit with fraud allegations against the hospital. But you need to understand something. They're going to come at you hard. They'll say you're disgruntled, vindictive, that you stole patient data illegally. The medical board might investigate your license. This gets ugly before it gets better. Jessica's jaw set in a way Marcus recognized. The expression of someone who'd already lost enough that further damage stopped mattering compared to doing what was right. I became a nurse to help people. Dr. Chen was stealing from patients, from insurance, from Medicare. Someone has to stop him. If that someone has to be me, then okay. I can handle ugly. Marcus smiled. Then we'll handle it together. Sophie will draft the complaint. We'll file by end of week. And Miss Morales, you're going to win this. After Jessica left, Sophie turned to her father with an expression that mixed pride and worry in equal measure. We're going to need expert witnesses. Medical consultants don't come cheap, and the Lockhart Fund specifically prohibits using donated money for expert fees. Then we'll figure it out. We always do. The law had become something different than what Marcus remembered from his first career. Back then, practicing law had meant corner offices and expensive lunches and clients who could afford to pay hourly rates that exceeded what most people earned in a week. Now it meant scraping together resources, calling in favors, working twice as hard for a fraction of the compensation, and somehow finding that infinitely more satisfying than anything he'd done before his world fell apart 15 years ago. Kate arrived at 6:30 with Thai food and paper bags and the particular energy she carried when Quantum Core had launched something new. Her company had recovered from the trial's disruption stronger than before. The conspiracy's exposure transforming her from controversial figure into sympathetic genius. Stock prices had climbed 40% above their pre-trial levels. Strategic partnerships multiplied. The room temperature quantum processor that Titan Energy had tried so desperately to suppress was now in production, with units shipping to 12 countries and orders backlogged for 18 months. I brought pad thai and spring rolls and that mango sticky rice you pretend not to like, but always finish. Sophie grabbed the food with the enthusiasm of someone who'd forgotten to eat lunch. You're a goddess. Dad was about to make me order pizza again. Pizza is a perfectly nutritious meal. Pizza is what you eat when you've given up on food having nutritional value. They ate together in the conference room. The three of them sprawled in chairs that still had protective plastic on the arms, talking about cases and quantum computing and Sophie's upcoming bar exam results that would arrive any day now. This had become their rhythm over the past 2 years, the careful construction of family from people who'd been broken separately and learned to fit together around the jagged edges. Kate had changed in ways that went deeper than hair worn down instead of pulled back, jeans instead of Armani suits on weekends, laughter that came more easily than it used to. The walls she'd built to protect herself from connection had come down brick by brick, each small vulnerability a gift she'd never given anyone before. She'd told Marcus about the night terrors that still woke her sometimes, the sound of that SUV's engine in her dreams, the moment of helplessness before impact, about the guilt surrounding her parents' deaths, how she'd been too busy building her company to visit them the weekend before the accident, about the fear that success was all she'd ever be capable of, that $14 billion was compensation for being fundamentally unable to form genuine human connections. Marcus had matched her vulnerability with his own. Sarah's final days, when the cancer had spread too far for hope and all that remained was managing pain and saying goodbyes that never felt adequate. The years he'd wasted in anger after being disbarred, time he should have spent with his daughter, but had instead spent fighting appeals and nursing grudges. The terror that loving someone again meant betraying memory, that removing his wedding ring would erase Sarah from existence rather than simply acknowledging she was gone. 6 months ago, he'd finally taken the ring off. They'd been having coffee in Kate's apartment when she'd noticed him twisting it unconsciously, the habit of 13 years. "You don't have to remove it for me." "I'm not. I'm removing it for me." The metal felt strange coming off, the band leaving an indentation in his skin that had become permanent over the years. "I'll always love her, but she's not here. You are. And I think Sarah would be furious if I spent the rest of my life as a memorial to the bombs instead of living in the present." Kate had taken his hand, the one without the ring, and held it gently. "Loving me doesn't erase loving her. No, it just means I'm brave enough to try again." Turns out courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway. The relationship had developed in the spaces between building their respective empires. Dinners that turned into conversations lasting until dawn, both of them discovering that workaholism was easier to diagnose than cure, but that having someone willing to order you to bed at 2 in the morning helped. Weekend trips to places where phones didn't work and obligations couldn't reach them. Hiking in the Catskills, where Kate discovered she hated bugs but loved the silence, or museums in Philadelphia where Marcus realized he'd spent so many years surviving, he'd forgotten to look at art. Kate learned to cook, badly, with the determination she brought to quantum physics, but none of the innate talent. Her grilled cheese sandwiches were inevitably burned on one side and raw on the other. Her pasta came out either crunchy or disintegrating into mush. But she kept trying, and Marcus kept eating the results with the diplomatic skills of someone who understood that effort mattered more than outcomes. He taught her to appreciate diners instead of restaurants, where waiters described each ingredient's origin story, showed her that coffee from a bodega tasted just as good as coffee from a place that required appointments, introduced her to his old neighbors in Queens, where the bodega owner remembered when Marcus used to count out his change for bread, and the subway clerk had watched him board the early train every morning for 12 years. Kate met these people, shared their stories, and slowly began to understand that wealth was supposed to be a tool rather than a wall. She'd grown up with money, built more money, but had never quite grasped that its purpose was enabling life rather than replacing it. They argued sometimes, though always about trivial things that masked deeper fears. Kate worked too much, sacrificing sleep and health to push quantum computing forward. Marcus carried too much himself, reluctant to delegate even simple tasks because asking for help still felt like admitting weakness. But they learned to recognize the patterns, to call each other out gently, to compromise in ways that neither had managed before because neither had cared enough about another person to bother trying. The proposal happened on a random Tuesday in November, 11 months after the trial ended. They'd been walking through Central Park, leaves crunching underfoot in that peculiar autumn way, discussing whether Sophie should work at the firm or pursue a judicial clerkship after graduation. Marcus had stopped walking. Kate took 3 more steps before realizing he wasn't beside her anymore. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything is extremely right, which is why I'm going to ruin this moment by doing something I've been planning poorly for weeks." He pulled a small box from his pocket. The ring inside wasn't expensive by Kate's standards. He'd spent what he could afford, which was a fraction of what she wore casually, but it was carefully chosen, simple and elegant in exactly her style. "Catherine Brennan, you're the smartest person I've ever met and possibly the worst cook in 5 boroughs. You work too hard, sleep too little, and have strong opinions about coffee that are objectively wrong. You're also brave and brilliant and capable of incredible vulnerability when you let yourself be. I love you in ways I didn't think I was capable of loving anyone again. Marry me." Kate had stared at him, then at the ring, then back at him. For a terrible moment, Marcus thought he'd miscalculated, moved too fast, assumed a future she didn't want. Then she started crying. actually crying, tears streaming down her face in a way he had only seen once before, the night after the car accident when shock had finally given way to fear. Yes, obviously yes. Did you think I was going to say no? I thought there was a non-zero probability you'd say it was too soon, or we should wait, or you weren't ready for marriage as an institution. Marcus Hayes, I haven't been ready for anything in my entire life. I wasn't ready to start quantum core at 25. I wasn't ready for my parents to die. I wasn't ready to be sued by an energy conglomerate or almost murdered on a public street. But I did all those things anyway. So yes, I'll marry you, and we'll probably be terrible at it sometimes, but we'll be terrible together. He'd slipped the ring on her finger, and they'd stood there in Central Park while joggers ran past and tourists took photos, and the city continued its relentless forward motion. Two people choosing each other with the full knowledge that choosing meant risk, but that the alternative was spending forever alone. Rachel Morrison had been the first person Kate told. Their monthly dinners had evolved from awkward obligation to something approaching genuine friendship, though the scar tissue from betrayal never quite disappeared. Rachel worked as a paralegal at Hayes & Hayes now, released from witness protection after Stanton's final appeals were exhausted. She arrived early every morning, stayed late every night, treated every case like penance and redemption combined. The dinner after the engagement happened at a small Italian place in the village. Red checkered tablecloths and wine and water glasses and breadsticks that came unlimited. I'm getting married. Rachel had frozen with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. To Marcus. To Marcus. That's wonderful, really, Kate. I'm happy for you. The words were sincere, but Kate heard the layers underneath. Rachel was happy, genuinely happy, but she also recognized that she'd never be invited to the wedding as anything more than an obligatory guest. That 5 years of working together, followed by 6 months of betrayal, meant certain bridges stayed permanently burned even after forgiveness was granted. I want you there, at the wedding. Not as someone I'm obligated to invite, but as someone who matters. Rachel's eyes had filled. I don't deserve that. Probably not, but I'm offering it anyway. You made a choice, Rachel. A terrible choice under terrible circumstances. But when it mattered most, when lives were literally on the line, you chose correctly. That has to count for something. I'll never stop being sorry. I know I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking you to channel it into something productive. Keep working cases. Keep fighting for people who need someone in their corner. Let your guilt make you better instead of just making you miserable. They'd finished dinner with conversation that flowed easier than it had in months, talking about the wedding plans and cases and Rachel's sister, whose cerebral palsy required constant care, but who was thriving now that Rachel could afford better support services with her paralegal salary. Sophie's bar exam results arrived on a Wednesday morning, 3 months before the wedding. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter of Kate's apartment. Marcus had been staying there most nights, though he'd kept his Queen studio as a reminder of where he'd come from, like a small bomb waiting to detonate. Sophie stared at it for 15 minutes before Marcus finally grabbed it and tore it open. You passed. Top 5% in the state. Sophie's knees actually buckled. Marcus caught her, and they stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while she cried with relief and exhaustion and the particular emotion of someone who'd worked relentlessly toward a goal and finally achieved it. Mom would be proud. Mom would be impossible. She'd ask why you weren't in the top 1%. Marcus laughed because it was true. Sarah had been loving but demanding, the kind of parent who believed potential was something to be maximized rather than coasted on. She would have been insufferable about Sophie's accomplishment, bragging to strangers and probably having t-shirts made. The thought hurt and comforted in equal measure. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Beyond words proud. Thanks, Dad. Now comes the hard part. The hard part was law school. No, the hard part is practicing law. Knowing the rules doesn't mean you know how to help people. That takes something different. She learned fast. Her first case was defending a man accused of assaulting a police officer during a protest. The charges were bogus. The video evidence showed the officer had instigated contact. But getting a jury to believe that required skills Sophie hadn't been taught in any classroom. Marcus watched her in court, seeing flashes of himself at that age, but also seeing something entirely her own. Where he'd been aggressive and confrontational, Sophie was surgical and precise. She didn't destroy the officer's credibility. She simply exposed each small inconsistency until the man's entire testimony unraveled, like a sweater with one pulled thread. The jury deliberated 90 minutes before returning a not guilty verdict. Sophie had maintained her composure through the announcement, through thanking the jury, through the aftermath. But in the car afterward, she turned to Marcus with an expression of pure disbelief. "We won. You won. I just watched. Is it always like that? The fear that you're going to fail, that you'll let someone down, that you don't actually know what you're doing?" Every single time. The fear doesn't go away. You just learn to work through it. How did you do it for so long? The pressure, the responsibility, knowing someone's life depends on whether you're smart enough or prepared enough or lucky enough. Marcus thought about the question. I did it because someone had to. Same reason you're doing it now. Because there are people who need help and not enough people willing to provide it. The fear is just the price of admission. They married on a Saturday in June when New York was beautiful in that particular way the city achieves twice a year, between winter's harshness and summer's oppressive humidity. Central Park at 3 o'clock, beneath trees that provided dappled shade and a canopy of green that felt like nature's cathedral. 40 guests, carefully chosen from the people who mattered most. Sophie as maid of honor, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself after vetoing Marcus's first 3 suggestions as catastrophically old-fashioned. Kate's former MIT advisor, who'd believed in her when quantum computing at room temperature was considered impossible. Judge Michael Torres, who'd presided over the trial and agreed to officiate the wedding. Rachel Morrison, seated toward the back but present. The bodega owner from Queens. The subway clerk. The night nurse from the hospital where Sarah had died, who'd held Marcus's hand during those final awful hours 13 years ago. Kate's tech industry friends mixed with Marcus's old neighbors in that particular alchemy of wedding guests. Venture capitalists, standing beside janitors. MIT professors beside transit workers. Wealth and working-class Brooklyn, finding unexpected common ground. Kate wore a dress she'd bought at Bloomingdale's off the regular rack, delighting in the minor scandal of a billionaire shopping retail. Simple, elegant, cream-colored silk that moved like water when she walked. No jewelry except Marcus's engagement ring, hair down around her shoulders because Marcus had mentioned once that he liked it that way. Marcus wore a suit that actually fit, purchased new with Sophie's help from a men's store in Brooklyn, where the tailor had known his measurements by touch and charged half what Manhattan would have demanded. Navy blue, conservative, exactly right for a man who'd spent 12 years in a janitor's uniform and was still learning to be comfortable in clothes that announced he mattered. Judge Torres stood beneath the oak tree, holding a worn leather book that turned out not to be a legal text, but a collection of poetry by Mary Oliver. He'd prepared his remarks carefully, speaking about justice and love, and how both required courage in the face of uncertainty. We gather here to witness Marcus Hayes and Catherine Brennan as they promise to choose each other, repeatedly and deliberately, in the full knowledge that choosing is both easier and harder than people imagine. Easier because love simplifies certain decisions. Of course, you'd stand beside this person, defend them, celebrate them. Harder because choosing someone every day, especially on days when you're exhausted or frustrated or scared, requires continuous recommitment to a promise that's easy to make and difficult to keep. The vows they'd written were simple. Marcus went first, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack it. Catherine, 2 years ago, you were a stranger. A billionaire I'd seen on the news, someone who lived in a completely different world than mine. Then I stood up in a courtroom because it was right, and you trusted me even though every logical reason said you shouldn't. You let me see past the armor you'd built, past the walls and the wealth and the Ice Queen reputation. You showed me the scared, brilliant, lonely woman underneath, and I fell in love with her, all of her. The parts that are easy and the parts that are hard. I promise to stand beside you, not behind or in front, but beside you as an equal partner. I promise to call you out when you're working yourself to death. I promise to eat your terrible cooking without complaint, and I promise to keep choosing you every single day, even when it's hard. especially when it's hard. Kate's turn. She'd insisted on going second, claiming she needed to see if Marcus actually pulled off sincerity before committing to earnestness herself. Her hands weren't quite steady, but her voice was clear. Marcus, I spent 13 years alone by choice. I built walls so high nobody could climb them. And I told myself it was strength when it was really just fear. Fear of being hurt, of being betrayed, of caring about someone enough that losing them would destroy me. Then you climb those walls with a mop and a briefcase and absolutely no regard for the fact that you should have been intimidated. You saw me not as a billionaire or a genius or an ice queen, but as a person who needed help. And you helped, expecting nothing in return. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help doesn't make you less, that the best things in life aren't bought or earned, but built together with someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. I promise to let you carry some of the weight instead of pretending I can handle everything alone. I promise to remember that success without you would be meaningless. And I promise to keep learning how to love, with you as my teacher and my partner and the person who makes me want to be brave. Judge Torres smiled. By the power vested in me by the state of New York and the basic human desire to see good people find happiness, I now pronounce you married. Marcus, you may kiss your wife. They kissed while 40 people applauded and someone's phone played music that wasn't quite appropriate for a wedding, but felt right anyway. The kiss was soft and certain and tasted like beginning rather than conclusion. The reception happened at the Queens Community Center, where Marcus had lived within walking distance for 12 years. They'd rented it for the evening, transformed the basketball court into a celebration space with folding tables and string lights and food from 6 different neighborhood restaurants that had donated services because Marcus had been a loyal customer when money was tight and loyalty mattered. The contrast was deliberate. Kate could have rented the plaza or any number of venues where wealth was expected and comfort guaranteed. But this felt more honest, more them. The joining of two worlds that should have been incompatible, but somehow worked. The bodega owner danced with a venture capitalist. The subway clerk who'd sold Marcus his morning coffee for a decade shared war stories with an MIT professor about surviving New York City. Wealth and working-class Brooklyn discovered they had more in common than either expected. The shared humanity that emerges when people stop performing their designated roles and simply exist together. Sophie gave the toast, standing on a chair so everyone could see her, commanding the room with confidence that came from 22 years of being Marcus Hayes' daughter and therefore understanding how to speak truth to any audience. My father taught me that losing everything isn't the end. It's just the intermission before something better. He showed me that failure is temporary, but giving up is permanent. That you can be knocked down so hard you think you'll never stand again and still find the strength to get up if you have something worth getting up for. Kate taught me that success without purpose is just noise. That money matters less than meaning. That building walls to protect yourself ultimately just leaves you alone inside a fortress of your own construction. Together, they taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone real enough to be imperfect with. Someone who sees your damage and doesn't run. Someone who knows exactly how broken you are and chooses you anyway, not despite the cracks, but because the cracks let the light through. To Marcus and Kate, may your marriage be as stubborn as you both are, and may you spend the next 50 years arguing about coffee and never running out of things to say. The crowd applauded. Marcus blinked rapidly, fighting tears that 13 years of being emotionally constipated hadn't quite prepared him to shed in public. Kate squeezed his hand, and they stood together while friends and neighbors and the unlikely family they'd constructed from ruins celebrated around them. The dancing started after dinner. Marcus, who hadn't danced since his wedding to Sarah 17 years ago, discovered his feet still remembered how to move. Kate, who claimed she'd never danced in her life, proved to be a liar as they swayed together to music that was too loud and slightly off-key but perfect anyway. We did it. We did. What comes next? Before Marcus could answer, a courier appeared at the community center entrance, scanning the crowd until he found Marcus. The man approached apologetically, holding an envelope marked urgent. Marcus Hayes, this was left at your office. They said you'd want it immediately. Marcus accepted the envelope with the wariness of someone who'd learned that paper could carry weapons disguised as words. He opened it carefully. Inside, legal documents. A new lawsuit against Catherine Brennan. Different technology, something about quantum encryption this time, but the same underlying goal. Delay, obstruct, undermine, eliminate. The plaintiff was a shell company Marcus didn't recognize, incorporated in Delaware, the corporate structure deliberately opaque. But at the bottom, representing the plaintiff as private counsel, James Brennan, Escorto, the name hit Marcus like cold water, washing away the warmth of celebration and replacing it with old anger that he'd thought he'd moved past. James Brennan, Titan Energy's vice president 15 years ago when they'd orchestrated Marcus's destruction. The architect of evidence theft and career assassination. The man whose signature had been on the false accusations that had cost Marcus his license, his income, his time with Sarah before cancer took her. James Brennan, who disappeared after Titan's collapse, taken his insider knowledge and connections and rebuilt himself as private counsel, specializing in exactly the kind of corporate warfare he'd once orchestrated from inside. Kate read over his shoulder, her body tensing against his. They're not going to stop. No, they've got too much invested in the status quo. Your technology threatens hundreds of billions of dollars in existing infrastructure. They'll keep coming until we make it too expensive to continue. Sophie joined them, her celebration mood evaporating as she processed the situation. Round two? Marcus looked at his daughter, then at his wife. His wife, that would take some getting used to, both of them waiting for him to decide their next move but ready to fight regardless of what he chose. Round two, but not tonight. Tonight we celebrate what we've built. Tomorrow we start planning how to protect it. He folded the papers and slipped them into his jacket pocket. The weight was familiar, not quite comfortable, but not entirely unwelcome either. This was his life now, building something worthwhile and defending it from people who viewed justice as an obstacle rather than an objective. 2 years ago, Marcus had been a janitor holding a mop, invisible to everyone who mattered. Now he stood in a Queens community center surrounded by people who'd fought beside him, loved him, believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. The war wasn't over. It might never be over. Power didn't surrender quietly, and industries worth hundreds of billions didn't accept disruption gracefully. But he'd learned something in that courtroom, something the years of mopping floors had taught him, while his hands worked and his mind stayed sharp. Justice wasn't about winning once. It was about showing up every day and fighting for what was right, even when, especially when, the odds were impossible. He'd lost once, lost everything. Career, reputation, time with his wife, years of his daughter's childhood. The loss had nearly destroyed him, left him hollow and haunted, and convinced his best days were behind him. But standing here in this community center, looking at Kate and Sophie and the life they'd built from fragments, Marcus understood something he'd missed during those bitter years. Losing everything once meant you stopped being afraid of losing it again. You learned that survival was possible even after total destruction, that rebuilding was an option, that second chances existed for people brave enough to reach for them. The music played on, the celebration continued. And in Marcus Hayes' pocket, the next battle waited patiently for Monday morning. Kate's head found his shoulder, comfortable in ways that used to terrify her. Are you scared? Terrified. But fear and action aren't mutually exclusive. You taught me that. Pretty sure you taught me that the night after the car accident. Then we taught each other. That's how partnership works. They moved back into the reception, past guests who didn't know the war had just been declared again, past celebration that would need to pause for preparation, past the illusion that victory was ever permanent. Sophie intercepted them halfway across the floor, phone already out, clearly running searches on James Brennan and whatever shell corporation he had assembled this time. I'll start research tonight. We need to know who's funding this, what their actual endgame is, whether this is Titan's remnants or a completely new player. Tomorrow. Tonight you're 22 and celebrating your father's wedding. The work can wait 12 hours. Dad, they filed this on your wedding day. That's not coincidence. They're sending a message. And we'll send one back. But on Monday, in an office, when we're thinking clearly instead of running on adrenaline and wedding cake. Rachel Morrison approached, her expression mixing concern with the particular look of someone who'd spent 2 years learning to recognize corporate conspiracy from the inside. I saw the envelope. Whatever it is, I can help. I know how these operations work. I know what to look for. Marcus studied her. The woman who'd betrayed Kate was barely visible underneath the woman who'd risked everything to set things right. Redemption wasn't a destination, but a direction, something you moved toward rather than achieved. Rachel would spend the rest of her life moving toward it, and that was enough. Monday, 9 a.m., conference room. We'll break down the filing, trace the corporate structure, figure out what we're actually fighting. I'll be there. The reception wound down near midnight. Guests departed with full stomachs and tired feet, calling goodbyes and promises to stay in touch, that some would keep and others wouldn't. The community center slowly emptied, transformed back from celebration space into the gymnasium where neighborhood kids would play basketball on Monday. Marcus and Kate walked out together, Sophie beside them, the three of them forming a unit that looked fragile but had survived everything thrown at it. The warm June air smelled like summer arriving, that particular New York mix of concrete and flowers, and 8 million people living on top of each other. Stars were barely visible through light pollution, but they were there, marking paths through darkness the way they'd done for millennia before cities learned to drown them out. You know what I realized? Kate's voice was quiet enough that only Marcus and Sophie could hear. What? I spent 12 years building technology to change the world. Revolutionary advances in computing and energy storage. Nobel Prize-worthy work, according to people who know about these things. But a janitor with a mop changed my world more than anything I ever invented. Changed it by seeing me when I was invisible, standing beside me when I was alone, fighting for me when I'd given up fighting for myself. Marcus pulled her closer. I wasn't trying to change anything. I was just trying to do what was right. That's why it worked. You didn't want anything from me. You just wanted to help. They reached the car, but none of them moved to get in. The night felt too perfect to end, the kind of moment that existed outside normal time, suspended and precious and already becoming memory even as it happened. Sophie broke the silence. We're going to win. Whatever Brennan throws at us, whatever resources he's assembled, whatever strategy he's planned, we're going to win because we have something he doesn't. What's that? We're right, and right eventually wins, as long as someone's stubborn enough to keep fighting until it does. Marcus thought about his daughter's words. 22 years old and already understanding what took most people a lifetime to learn. That justice was a commitment rather than a conclusion. That the law was a tool that could be used for good or evil depending on who wielded it. That power would always try to corrupt the system, and it was the job of people who couldn't be corrupted to push back. Then we fight, together, and we keep fighting until they realize we're not going to stop. They got in the car. Kate's driver navigated through Queens toward the estate in Westchester that had become home in ways Marcus's studio apartment never quite managed. The city scrolled past the windows, millions of lights marking millions of lives, all of them containing their own dramas and defeats and small victories that mattered enormously to the people living them. Somewhere in that city, James Brennan was probably celebrating his lawsuit, confident that money and connections would eventually grind down Marcus's resistance. He'd underestimated Marcus once before, 15 years ago, and had ultimately lost everything when his conspiracy fell apart. But memory was short and arrogance was infinite. So here they were again, preparing to refight battles that should have been settled. Marcus wasn't the same person he'd been 15 years ago. That version had been idealistic and naive, believing the system protected people who did right things. He'd learned better, learned that the system protected whoever had more resources to manipulate it. But he'd also learned that having fewer resources didn't mean having no chance. It just meant fighting smarter, working harder, being willing to sacrifice more than your opponent was prepared to sacrifice. The car pulled through the estate gates. Home. Not the home Marcus had imagined when he was 30 and building a legal career, but the home he'd found after everything fell apart and had to be reconstructed from fragments. Inside the guest house that had somehow become more his than his own apartment ever managed, Marcus hung up his wedding suit carefully. Kate disappeared into the bedroom to wrestle with her dress, emerging 15 minutes later in jeans and one of Marcus's old Columbia Law t-shirts that had survived 12 years in the back of his closet. I'm keeping this. It's comfortable and it annoys you, which makes it perfect. Stealing your husband's clothes on your wedding night, very romantic. Romance is overrated. Comfort and mild irritation are the foundation of successful marriage. They stood in the living room of a house that cost more per month than Marcus had earned in a year as a janitor. Looking at each other in that particular way married people do when they're still getting used to the concept. I love you, Catherine Brennan Hayes. I love you, Marcus Hayes. Even though your coffee opinions are objectively wrong and you're going to make me eat terrible diner food for the rest of my life. That's the deal. You knew what you were signing up for. They went to bed eventually, exhaustion from the day's celebration finally overwhelming the adrenaline of Brennan's lawsuit. But before sleep claimed him, Marcus thought about the journey that had led here. From disbarred lawyer to courthouse janitor to defender of billionaires to husband to fighter preparing for the next battle. The path hadn't been direct. It had curved and broken and doubled back on itself more times than he could count. But it had led him here, to this moment, this person, this life that felt earned rather than given. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Monday would bring strategy sessions and legal filings and the grinding machinery of corporate warfare. But tonight, Marcus Hayes slept beside someone he loved in a home they'd built together, protected by walls that represented safety rather than isolation. The law didn't care about money or influence or how many times you'd been knocked down. It cared about truth in evidence and lawyers stubborn enough to keep fighting. Marcus had been knocked down, he'd gotten back up, and he'd keep getting up for as long as it took, because that's what you did when you'd found something worth protecting. Justice wasn't a destination, it was a direction, and Marcus Hayes had finally learned which way to walk.